y'all, I am back from vacation and ready to report on all the highs and lows of the first 50,000 words of my Camp Nano project this past month. Surprisingly, I actually didn't do a lot of writing on this vacation after Camp Nano ended on July 31st. I did some query prep, I did some world building, I finished Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn trilogy, which, as always, is great for a boost of creative juices and just, wow. That time of not writing gave me a little bit of breathing room to sort of reflect on the things I liked about my work in progress so far, the things that I don't like as much, and the things that I'm just downright unhappy with, which now I'm going to share with you. So let's start with the good, shall we? Number 1. Dialogue. I have mentioned in past videos that in past drafts of this project, I was very rigidly, strictly formal with my language. So that included the dialogue of all the characters. It meant that they spoke really formally and didn't sound at all natural. So this time around, I loosened up a fair bit with the dialogue specifically, allowing the characters to speak a little more freely. And by freely, I mean using contractions. Wow! It's actually been awesome because it's allowed me to love my characters, especially my main character, even more. They're starting to feel more like real people because they actually speak like real people. Number 2, I have added some more villains to the mix to augment the villain that I already had, who was fine, but in a word, he was just kind of weak. His motives were sort of blah, and the character just sort of fell flat. I have worked a lot with his character to make it more complex, to add a little more detail to his backstory and to his motives, and I'm a lot happier with him now than I was before, but in adding those other villains, I've allowed him to stay there, but this time as more of like a lower level villain who is operating under the shadow of the larger scale villains. One of the villains I added is an actual person, the other one is more of a concept at this point, but I really like what they're bringing to the story and how they're raising the stakes of the entire series. Number 3, there was a really mushy-gushy scene in all of my prior drafts of this project between a father and son, a reunion scene. Ugh, I was just never happy with it. It was always way too sappy. They haven't seen each other for like 20 years. The son has like no relationship with the father whatsoever, so it didn't make sense for it to be so over the top emotional. So this time around, I managed to sort of write around that scene. You can see some of the reactions of both the father and son to being thrown together again after all this time, but I also managed to avoid showing all of it, and I threw some wrenches into the circumstances around them to make the moment less conducive to an extended mushy-gushy heart-to-heart. So in that way, I think it's toned down a little bit, a little more realistic, and not quite so sappy. Number 4, like the dialogue, I've also sort of pulled back on the formality of the prose itself. Not too much that it becomes overly casual, but enough that I can just say what I'm trying to say, instead of getting hung up on, oh, I can't say let, or off, or stop, or smash, or I'll, or can't, or what. And before you try to look for logic in that list of forbidden words, don't bother because there isn't any. Number 5, I slowed down the timeline a little bit to give my main character a little more time in one particular setting. In past drafts, he barely gets any time to breathe there before he's being sent off in a new direction. So I really wanted to give him a little more time there to make connections with some people and to build his character and show us a little more of his character in that setting. I also wanted to make sure that the entire first book of this series doesn't just take place over the course of like a couple days, which was the case in a past draft. This should sort of stretch it out a bit. Number 6, I threw some wrenches into the Chosen One trope just to make it a little less cut and dry, a little more unpredictable, because of course that trope is fairly common in fantasy. I didn't want the audience to think that they knew exactly how it was going to end as soon as they picked it up. I'm really happy with these sort of twists that are changing the course of the entire series that I think are going to make things a little more ambiguous and a little less predictable. Those are my goods, and there were actually more of them than I expected, so yay! Now for my bads, beginning with number 1, which is length. Even with the more direct, more to the point, streamlined word choice. I still feel like my page count is just out of control. It's taking more pages this time around than it did in the past draft. I'm just really hoping that length of the story doesn't become a problem. I don't want to have to change the genre or change the age group that I'm trying to target just because of length. Admittedly, and to cut myself some slack, I think a lot of the length comes from the conversations that I've added because dialogue is so much more fun now. Conversation does take up a lot more space. It's not very efficient on the page, but I'm loving all those new conversations because I've found that those are some of my favorite parts of books, is those moments where nothing crazy significant to the plot is necessarily happening. You're just getting a glimpse of the characters interacting with each other and being themselves. And I think it makes the story feel more like someone's life instead of just like a story contrived to be a story for entertainment purposes as a story. Number 2 on the bad list is my chapter titles, which I know doesn't really sound like a major concern, and it isn't. I'm not putting a ton of thought into it or losing sleep over it, but I'm not 100% happy with the chapter situation that I have going on. I'm having trouble deciding whether I want to mash a bunch of POVs into each chapter and go with like a set page limit for each chapter. That's what I did in the past. I had maybe like 10 computer pages would be a chapter, and then as many perspectives as I could fit into it would be that chapter. This time around, I'm wondering if I should split up every point of view into its own chapter, kind of like the Lunar Chronicles, which would mean smaller chapters, but more of them. We'll see. Number 3. There is one character that I just do not understand. She has some very complex issues, and I say that not because I know what they are, but because I'm really having a hard time figuring out what they are. She's just given me nothing. So clearly our relationship needs some work. I will say though that last night I made the discovery that she has a phobia that I think is going to make her character a lot more interesting and is going to help me understand her a little better. So there is hope on the horizon for that one. And number 4, the send-off scene in the Chosen One trope. I guess it's not surprising to have your hero setting out in a new direction to fulfill his divine purpose with the magical weapon of significance at his side. Even though I've written this scene multiple times over the course of my past drafts, I've never really been fully happy with it. My past ones always just felt a little bit flat and a tad preachy. This time around, I didn't want that to be the case. I like it more, it's more dynamic, I think it reads better and puts my main character in a little bit of a better light. But almost as soon as I finished, I was thinking of things that I wanted to change or add or take away or augment. So there's that. It's still on my mental plate, which is a little bit annoying. I know that I'll get it to a point where I'm happy with it at some point, though. That brings me to the ugly, which is just this. I have so much world building and planning to do. I think my mistake was in reading a Brandon Sanderson series during or around the Camp Nano process, because it's really hard to read Brandon Sanderson books and then not be inspired to up your world building game by like 1,000. After finishing Camp Nano, I dedicated a little bit of time to world building, and within just a couple days, like 2 or 3 days, the scope of not only my world, but the entire story and the entire series basically quadrupled. There's so much going on now behind the scenes of the story that I'm actually writing that was not there before, and so I have so many threads that I now need to weave in and weave together, which kind of makes everything messy. The stuff that I've already written will now need to be adjusted. The plans that I had for what's coming will now need to be adjusted. It just sort of threw a wrench in everything, but it's kind of a good problem to have because I think I'm going to be a lot happier with the overall series now that these details have really started to raise the stakes. All in all, it was a very successful Camp Nano. Thank God I was able to meet my 50,000 word goal, which was very exciting. And I also enjoyed the little break from actually working on the manuscript. I think God knew I needed that, and I was able to use it to sort of take a step back, relax a little bit, and hopefully get into a better headspace to remember why I am doing this at all. In addition to sort of recalibrating and getting my focus back on God, this vacation also allowed me to do some things that I've never done before, like canoeing, don't judge me, or swimming in a lake, and not like a great lake like Lake Huron where you don't see any fish in your immediate vicinity. I'm talking like a lake with black water and seaweed and living things in and amongst the swimmers. Anyone who knows me will know how much courage it required to swim through the black waters to the floating dock and back. And if you don't know me, take my word for it, it required a lot of courage. Also, in other news, I've discovered a new dream. I would love to make candles, and I don't really know much about candle making. Don't really know where to start. It's pretty out of the blue, but there's that. Anywho, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like and subscribe and share your thoughts. Do you have any goods, bads, and uglies for your Camp Nano project or for your current work in progress, whatever that may be? Can you relate to any of the struggles that I am having with my work in progress? I hope you guys have an awesome day, and as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.